Hi, my name is Zalesny, and I am a 20-year-old female from the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Growing up, culture was a huge part of my life and has affected many of the occupations I engaged in growing up. My family's background continues to have a huge influence on my life as a college student, and I plan to speak about that. Let me take you through my family's culture, background, and why it is such a strong influence on who I am today and its relation to occupational science in general. According to Gupta, culture can be defined as a complex system of multiple universal elements such as language, values, traditions, and behaviors that coalesce in different combinations akin to a kaleidoscope to create a whole. Growing up, I was always told that my family was 100% Polish. My parents are both immigrants from Poland, making me a first generation college student. As I got older, this changed when I found out I had a little German and Jewish blood in me. German referring to the ethnicity part, not the religious part. And my parents withheld the stories of past family members for years because they didn't want to scare me. But as I've grown older, these stories truly make me see our cultural orientation in a different light. I plan to get into this. Being Polish also meant practicing Catholicism, as the majority of Poland is Catholic. Religion was definitely a huge part of my life growing up. So, there are many stories that I've taken with me growing up in a Polish household, some good and some bad. One in particular stands out to me the most, that being my grandmother's experience in a concentration camp during World War II. My grandmother, Władysława, and her brother were put into work camp during the heat of the war and were luckily able to escape, but unfortunately, her brother ended up passing away a few years later due to the harsh conditions of the camp. I think that talking to my grandmother about this topic has definitely opened my eyes to the kind of oppression that people can face in different countries. And on a lighter note, another story that I find sweet is the fact that my mother was visiting from Poland when she was 18 and met my dad, so she decided to stay in the United States. My parents got married in their early 20s and built a life here in the US, basically from scratch. And it makes me proud to know that although they struggled, anything is possible. So, in terms of artifacts that have been handed down, my mother and my grandmother have always given me a lot of crosses in relation to our religion. And so that's always been super important. And my grandmother has a lot of rings that were passed down from generation to generation. And so I will be inheriting those from her. So, several of my current occupations stem from my family's cultural background. One in particular includes cooking Polish dishes that I like to share with my friends. I love to cook pierogi and kluski in specific. And without my mom there to teach me to cook growing up, I don't think I would engage in this particular occupation. I also noticed cleaning has been a huge occupation within my life growing up and even now. And I attribute that to my mom being a housekeeper when she came to the US. She didn't speak English, and that was the only job she could get. So she kind of took a lot of that and was able to teach us. Because my parents struggled so much to build the life that we have now, my occupation of school has always been a huge part of my life. And I feel like part of the reason I try so hard to achieve good grades in school is due to the fact that my parents never had the opportunity to go to college. And I really just want to make them proud. So that is super important to me. Being Polish has definitely shaped the way I engage in the occupations I do. I feel that because being hardworking is a skill taught to me from a young age and a huge part of Polish culture in general. This is something that I apply to many of the occupations I engage in, especially school and work. I will say that growing up around many Polish people has caused me to be less judgmental of others, and let me explain why. So, my sister had seizures when she was younger, and she's fine now, but this caused her not to be able to speak until she was about 5 years old, meaning that my parents weren't going to teach her Polish and English when she could barely speak English alone. And so they weren't also going to only teach me Polish. So we grew up not knowing Polish. And I definitely got a lot of backlash and judgment from people within the Polish community growing up. And that's just something that I never wanted to be like. So I think honestly, this has made me less judgmental to others. And it definitely made me stray away from my Polish background for many years as I realized how hurtful that was. But I also know that I cannot base a few bad experiences um, growing up with not identifying with being Polish because there's so many great parts of that. And I also know that like being Polish isn't the only thing that I identify with. I am Catholic, I'm a friend, a student, a daughter, and a sister. So, in terms of social positions in the article by Hero 1999, I think that my social positions and just means of socialization have changed so much just as I've gotten older, and I found it very interesting to read about the differences like between birth and then how culture and institutions and stuff can shape the way that we are socialized. And I think that my parents played a huge role in socializing me to integrating me into Polish culture and all of that growing up. But I also think that like school, American school, Polish school, church, Polish mass, all of these things had a huge impact um, on me, which would be institutional and cultural socialization. And I think that it has had a huge impact on me growing up. And it is hard for me to state right now where I am on that hierarchy. But in terms of doing, being, and becoming, I think that I'm almost becoming more American in a sense, just because as years have gone on and I've gone to college, I've met so many different kinds of people where I'm not stuck on that um, kind of Polish mindset that I had growing up. My friends were all Polish. My parents only had Polish friends, and I've kind of grown out of that bubble. And so I'm very interested to see what happens in the future with that. But I think I'm being the daughter of immigrants, it's never going to change. And I'm definitely interested to learn more about my Polish culture, but I've definitely strayed away from that for a little bit. So I found both of the articles given and then also the class lectures super interesting and eye opening because I never really had a chance to sit down and think about my culture from like an OS perspective or just a deeper perspective in general. So Gupta 2016 mentions that culture is learned, and I've learned this in other classes as well recently, but I believe this to be incredibly true in my case, as all the knowledge I have towards being Polish has been taught through my family. And Gupta 2016 also talks about the roles of masculinity and femininity within a culture. And I've definitely seen this growing up as my mother stayed at home while my sister and I were younger, and my dad has continued to be the breadwinner. So, Polish family life is very traditional, and I plan to implement this into my future family as well. That's pretty important to me. And I also definitely had previous assumptions about my identity growing up that have changed throughout the past few weeks. Gupta talks about the idea of socialization, stating the process by which people acquire the characteristics of a culture group. And I know that growing up, all my friends were Polish, as stated before, and that definitely socialized me in a different way. And in the class lectures, we learned that culture can bring awareness to similarities and differences. So I also want to mention that growing up, I found it very hard to identify with being American or being Polish. And I know that I'm just honestly somewhere in between. I'm never going to fully understand the experiences of other people, but these are mine. So here are my references from the Gupta and Hero articles. And in conclusion, I had such a great time doing this project and getting pictures from my mom and just like reminiscing on past memories and like looking into my culture on a deeper level and an OS perspective. Thank you.